I am a man who enjoys himself a good, relatable story. One with grounded themes and real-feeling characters where in some way, shape, or form I can see myself on the screen. I think most people would agree with that sentiment, at least at face value. It's nice to feel like a work of fiction or nonfiction understands you to some degree. Even in more fantastical or clearly escapist works of fiction, audiences will still tend to gravitate more towards grounded, relatable characters. Perhaps the exaggerated or more absurd aspects of these stories actually strengthens the power of a familiar face. Where things start to get weird, though, is the level of direct relatability necessary for some people to feel understood. Or to put it more bluntly, some people only want to project themselves directly onto the main character and live vicariously through them. And that is why half of our video game protagonists look like this. Like this. Still, there's nothing inherently wrong with that occasionally. Some of my favorite games have silent protagonists. It can be enjoyable, and it's something I'm certainly guilty of at times. But what's important to remember here is that it's very easy for me to be guilty of this, because I'm spoiled for choice of characters and stories that I can easily project myself onto. Growing up, two of my favorite fictional characters were Obi-Wan, a white man with brown hair, and Aragorn, a white man with brown hair. In a game with realistic human character creation, I have always been able to recreate myself, well, sometimes excluding my curly hair, but we'll just do a thinking emoji on that and move on. It is admittedly much easier to latch onto someone who looks and acts like you, and I think that's an important point to make here at the start. It's also ultimately why representation in media matters. There is strength to seeing yourself depicted on screen or in text or in game, and it's doubly important for younger audiences who often come at media more innocently, but also much more straightforward. Direct, immediate relatability and self-projection have been an important core tenet of storytelling for thousands of years, and surely thousands more. But importantly, they're not the only way to relate to a story. And all of that brings us to Pixar's Turning Red, a movie about a Canadian Asian teen girl, four things I am not, who turns into a red panda, something I cannot do. It is probably important to note then that this movie made me cry. Cry very real, very feeling related to tears. So then, how did this happen? If I couldn't slap myself right into the main character chair here, then how did I relate so deeply to this film? Well, it's because at their core, stories are built upon themes and shared human experiences. One of the most relatable shows I have ever talked about on this channel is Adachi and Shimamura, a story about two Japanese high school girls. Anything can be relatable on some level because we as humans all have shared experiences, even if that's as simple as being alive and feeling emotions. Go a step deeper and paths immediately begin to diverge, but any discussion about relating to media has to start at the simple fact that if you try hard enough, you can relate to a good deal of things. And that's just a baseline way to approach relating to someone else. Stories are often written to mirror real-world structures to make them easier to follow and understand. You yourself have never turned into a giant red panda, but you've probably underwent a physical change at some point, or felt insecure about your body, or learned to accept yourself for who you are. Take shonen anime as an example. You're not a ninja, you're not a pirate, and you're not a shinigami. But you relate to and admire these characters because you too have dreams you want to achieve, and the act of someone fighting extreme odds headstrong towards their goal is a very human, heartwarming concept. The underdog story is a time-honored tradition for a reason. I think Turning Red has plenty of those general to mildly specific strokes that are easily relatable to anyone. Anyone who has ever fought with a parent or went through puberty or tried to fit in at school. For me, May's relationship with her mother heavily mirrored my own, and having just moved out, the story beats towards the end hit hard. It goes from quirky, heartwarming story about acceptance into deep, heart-rending personal trauma very quickly. I won't list all the other themes out, but essentially, did you go to some sort of organized junior high or high school and were you, at some point, a teenager? Then guess what? There's something in this film for you. To be clear though, I don't want to discredit some of the core tenets of this film, things that make it wholly unique and things that I certainly can't claim to directly relate to. The period allegory, the distinct Chinese cultural ties, and the very real fight against generational trauma. These are things that neither affect me directly or even tangentially through my own family or culture, and I imagine if one, let alone all three, hit close to home for you, then this movie was probably a thermonuclear device. Still, it hit me pretty hard emotionally, way more than I thought it would going in. Which brings us to the most important point of all here. You don't actually need to relate to a story to enjoy it, as long as you are able to wield mankind's rarest and most powerful skill, empathy. Any conversation about the reception to this film has to, at some point, mention two things. It is a film for children, and that people are remarkably bad at being empathetic, particularly towards those younger than them. If they can't see themselves in a situation, that's it. It's not worth thinking about the feelings or the circumstances that caused it. I know this for a fact because I read a lot of Yelp reviews. God bless food service workers. The ability to relate is affected by the story being told, but if the storytelling building blocks are there, enjoying it comes down to your ability to empathize. Having a lot of natural empathy makes it very easy to see yourself in a character's shoes. I'm pretty far generationally removed from being part of a diaspora, but as someone who takes great pride in the very ridiculous way I pronounce certain Italian meats and cheeses, it's pretty easy to understand the deep desire to keep a hold of one's culture, particularly when it's a crucial part of your identity. And on a more serious note, that many societies prioritize assimilation above all else, even those that claim to be melting pots. But again, this is getting a bit more granular into this movie's themes, which I think it deserves, but the point remains, if you can at least empathize with the modern immigrant plight, try connecting a bit more with your roots, or I don't know, caring about another person at some point. It's surprisingly rewarding. And I do want to drive home this point again, that what I'm saying here is not that I can derive the same amount of relation or meaning out of something where I am not the target demo, just because I feel emotions super well. That's not true. Things will always be more meaningful the closer to home they hit. However, that is not an excuse for disregarding a story's message or simply not trying to connect at all. Stories can miss the mark. If they don't set up their themes correctly or provide us with characters that are flat and hard to root for, it can quickly unravel any audience investment. But not connecting with a character because they're poorly written is not the same as saying this is not for me, so it is bad. If the story is told well, there will always be something to latch onto, unless you are engaging with it in bad faith. Turns out, if you go into a film not thinking you're going to like it for specific reasons, you're probably not going to like it for those reasons. At some point, it's idiotic to engage with certain opinions that are clearly in bad faith. Or, well, I'll let Mr. Hardy take this one.
That's bait.
But it's frustrating when they don't even properly encapsulate the point they seem to want to make. If your bar for relating to something is sheer brute self-projection, that's ultimately your choice, and you're missing out on a lot of good stuff. But in this context then, did you not enjoy Finding Nemo because you're not a fish? Or Up because you're not an old widower in a floating house? I know that this is an argument designed to just let people get away with not liking a thing because it's aimed at teen girls, but when you lay it out like that, it just seems so silly. This is essentially the base argument here. I am not a teen girl, so this movie is not good. The other adjacent argument is that animated movie for children, no for big brain man like me, which is a can of worms we are not fully equipped to open right now. It's fine to be out of the target audience of something when that's actually true. I'm not telling you to go make me a video essay about the deeper meaning of CoComelon. But there's a reason Pixar movies are always so fondly remembered. They can easily connect with both children and adults. At least adults that want to have that connection. Choosing to broadcast an opinion on something while refusing to engage with it in even the simplest terms is lazy at best and openly antagonistic at worst. It's a weirdly elitist attitude towards things that are often trying to approach you with openness and understanding. Things that are just trying to give kids that don't look like you the type of media you loved so much as a kid. And if you hear the arguments I've been making and go, well, then representation doesn't matter, everybody can relate or empathize like this then, you've missed the point. The reason we know people can heavily relate to media that doesn't immediately represent what they look like or who they are is that marginalized people have been doing that for literally decades, maybe even centuries if you want to get specific about it. However, when your representation is ubiquitous, it's no longer something you worry about being there, simply something you get mad about when it's not. At the end of the day, non-relatability is just a pretty stupid critique to begin with, and something that often screams, I can't empathize with people who are not similar to me. I'm not begging and pleading with you to like Turning Red. I do, but if you don't, at least have a real reason not to. And no, those other reasons are not real reasons either. A lot of what we talked about today doesn't or shouldn't actually matter towards if this movie is even any good. And while I think it is, for many of the thematic reasons I mentioned earlier, when we talk about relatability or more aptly representation, overall quality is a point that should only have to be so important, especially when it comes to greenlighting more stories like this. Or perhaps I'm thinking about that the wrong way. When it comes to films like Turning Red, all I long for is a world where the only thing we have to discuss is the overall quality of the movie. A world where the cast is not a thing to be celebrated or derided, but simply a normal occurrence. A world where people meet a movie or book or game on its own terms and wholeheartedly try and understand what it wants to say, to find ways to enjoy it and ultimately ways to relate to it. Until that day comes, please just put in the tiniest bit of emotional effort and you'll have thousands of new stories open up to you. Not all of those stories are going to be masterpieces, but all that matters is that you determine that on their own merits. Relatability is a great way to quickly immerse yourself in a story, but it's not the only way. And treating it as such is harmful to both what actually gets made and your enjoyment of it. There's still room for self-insert storytelling, there always will be. Let's just spread around that self-wealth a little bit. Relatable stories aren't going anywhere, and with the brand new power of human empathy, they'll only continue to get stronger.